The fluorescent lights of Northwood High hummed above Miss Candace Vance, casting a sterile greenish glow over her pristine classroom. At 24, she was the youngest teacher on staff, and she approached her English literature lessons with an earnest enthusiasm that sometimes felt misplaced in the crumbling, decades-old building. Lately, though, the school's silence had begun to feel less peaceful and more attentive. It started subtly, a single, perfect dark red rose placed on her desk, sometimes before she arrived, sometimes after she'd stepped out for a faculty meeting. She initially dismissed it as a sweet gesture from a shy student, but the roses kept appearing, always the same shade, the same flawless bloom, long after the secret admirer note phase should have passed. Then came the little things. Her coffee mug, which she always left facing the window, would be turned toward the chalkboard. A stray pencil she'd dropped would be neatly centered on her gradebook. Small, intrusive corrections to her personal space. One afternoon, grading papers late, she realized the source of the persistent feeling of being watched. Mr. Silas Graves, the night janitor, was a fixture of Northwood, a man whose age was obscured by deep shadows and a perpetually worn gray uniform. He moved through the halls like a ghost, pushing his rattling cart. He rarely spoke, offering only a guttural grunt if addressed. Candace caught him that day, standing just outside her classroom, his head cocked toward the door's small window. He wasn't cleaning, he was just looking. When their eyes met, his were a pale, unsettling blue. He didn't flinch or look away immediately. A slow, chilling smile stretched across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just checking on things, Miss Vance," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement.
"Everything's fine, Mr. Graves," she said, her heart hammering. The stalking intensified. He was always nearby. When she walked to her car, she'd see his figure by the far service door, watching her taillights disappear. She started finding small, disturbing trinkets, a smooth, river-worn stone placed on her keyboard, a piece of cracked mirror tucked into her attendance sheet. These weren't loving gifts, they were declarations of presence. She went to Principal Miller, her voice trembling as she recounted the roses, the small intrusions, the janitor's unsettling gaze. "Mr. Graves has been here 30 years, Candace," the principal sighed, rubbing his temples. "He's eccentric, yes, but harmless. Just a quiet man doing a quiet job. We can't fire him over some misplaced roses." Dismissed, Candace was left utterly alone with her fear. She bought pepper spray. She barricaded her classroom door with a chair when she worked late, but the school was his domain, and she was a foreign, fragile object within it.
It was a Friday evening, the air thick with the smell of floor polish and rain. Candace was retrieving a forgotten laptop charger. She tried to move quickly, her footsteps echoing unnervingly loud in the deserted hall. As she reached her classroom door, she noticed it immediately. The silver lock on the outside, which the janitors used, was gone. In its place, A small, meticulously carved wooden bird sat nestled in the hole. A sudden, sharp, metallic clang echoed from the end of the hall. Mr. Graves' cart. Panic seized her. She shoved her key into the lock, her hands slick with sweat, but the door wouldn't turn. The mechanism was jammed. From down the hall, she heard the slow, scraping sound of the custodial cart moving toward her, deliberately, without hurry. She could visualize him. His gaunt face, the pale eyes, the horrible, silent smile. "You shouldn't have come back, Miss Vance," he whispered, his voice gaining a strange, possessive strength. "This is my school, and you are the prettiest thing I've cleaned in years." Candace screamed, a raw, useless sound that was swallowed by the high ceilings. She turned to run back, but the old man was impossibly fast, his heavy bootsteps closing the distance.
The following Monday, Northwood High was a flurry of hushed whispers and police tape. Miss Vance was missing. Her car was still in the lot. Her abandoned laptop charger lay on the floor of her classroom. The official search was extensive but fruitless. Principal Miller mentioned the eccentric janitor and his strange crush, but Mr. Graves was devastated by the disappearance, helping the police search every crawl space and storage room with disturbing diligence. He was questioned and released. Weeks later, the school settled into a grim normalcy. A new nervous English teacher was hired. One late evening, Mr. Graves was polishing the floor tiles in the storage room beneath the old theater stage, an area rarely used. He paused his machine, his pale eyes fixed on a high ventilation grate that led into the wall. He reached up, easily unfastening the grate screws. Inside the dusty, dark cavity, resting on a bed of old shredded lesson plans, was a small, crudely fashioned bird cage made of twisted wire. And nestled inside the cage, the only vibrant spot of color in the gloom, was the dark red, perfectly preserved rose from Candace's desk, now dried and brittle, but still whole. Mr. Graves reached in, gently touched a single dry petal, and then slid the grate back into place. He started the floor polisher again, the rhythmic grinding whir echoing softly. It sounded to his ears a lot like the faint, persistent scratching of fingernails trying to claw through thick sheet metal. He'd heard that sound for weeks now, but he knew the thick, concrete-lined ventilation shaft sealed off that section of the wall completely. No one ever leaves Northwood without a final cleaning, he thought, and he hummed a tuneless, content little song as he finished his work. The late afternoon sun cast long, skeletal shadows through the high, arched windows of Northwood Academy's library. 10-year-old Lily hated staying after school, but her history project on ancient civilizations wasn't going to research itself.
The only other person in the vast, silent room was Mr. Abernathy, the school librarian, hunched over his desk, meticulously cleaning his spectacles. Mr. Abernathy was less a man and more a collection of unsettling quirks. His skin was unnervingly pale, his movements stiff and deliberate, and his eyes, magnified by thick lenses, seemed to hold a detached, almost predatory curiosity. The other students whispered about his obsession with porcelain dolls, which filled a glass case in his small, dusty office, their vacant stares adding to the library's already oppressive quiet. Most chilling, however, were the rumors that he had a peculiar fondness for certain students, those with soft, unblemished skin and long, flowing hair, as one older girl had nervously put it. Lily, with her cascade of chestnut curls and smooth complexion, often felt his gaze linger a little too long when she checked out books. She was engrossed in a heavy tome about Egyptian pharaohs when a faint, muffled thud echoed from the back of the library near the rarely used archives. Lily froze, her heart giving a little jump. Mr. Abernathy didn't seem to notice, still polishing his glasses with a slow, circular motion. Another sound, clearer this time, a soft, choked gasp. Curiosity, tinged with a prickle of fear, tugged at Lily. She slid off her chair, careful not to make a sound, and began to tiptoe toward the archives section. The rows of towering bookshelves formed dark, labyrinthine corridors, each filled with forgotten knowledge and deep shadows. As she drew closer, a sliver of light from the main library cut through a gap in the shelves. She peered through it, and her breath hitched. Standing in the small, open space of the archives was Mr. Abernathy. But this wasn't the hunched, timid librarian. He stood tall, his back to Lily, his shoulders rigid. Before him, slumped against a shelf of ancient texts, was Sarah Jenkins, a quiet girl from the 6th grade with exceptionally long, golden hair that everyone admired. Sarah was unnaturally still. Her head was tilted at an awkward angle, and a dark, spreading stain bloomed on the front of her pristine white uniform. Mr. Abernathy held something in his hand, something metallic and sharp, glinting wetly in the dim light. Then Lily watched in frozen horror as he reached out, not to help Sarah, but to touch her hair. He ran his pale, bony fingers through the golden strands, a faint, almost reverent smile touching his lips. He leaned closer, his magnified eyes scrutinizing Sarah's pale face, tracing the line of her jaw with a disturbing tenderness. He whispered something, too low for Lily to hear, but the tone was chilling, a lover's murmur delivered to a corpse. He then produced a small silver comb from his pocket and began to carefully, meticulously untangle Sarah's long hair, smoothing it out like a precious fabric. Lily wanted to scream, to run, but her legs were rooted to the spot, her throat seized by terror. She watched,
paralyzed as Mr. Abernathy began to carefully cut a section of Sarah's hair, clipping it with deliberate precision. He then produced a small velvet bag, placing the golden strands inside with extreme care. He straightened up, his gaze sweeping the archive with a sudden, unnerving alertness. Lily ducked back, pressing herself against the musty spines of the books, her heart thundering against her ribs. She heard his slow, deliberate footsteps approaching, and the metallic clink of something being placed on a shelf.
Lily didn't know how long she stayed there, trembling, until the library's main door creaked shut, signaling Mr. Abernathy's departure. When she finally dared to emerge, the library was utterly silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights. The archive entrance was now blocked by a heavy, rolling shelf, carefully positioned. She didn't go to the police. Who would believe a 10-year-old about the quiet librarian? They would say she had an overactive imagination, that she saw things. And what if Mr. Abernathy found out she knew? The thought alone made her skin crawl. Lily went home, feigning a headache, and didn't mention her history project. The next day, the school buzzed with news. Sarah Jenkins hadn't come home. Her parents were frantic. The police were called. Mr. Abernathy was questioned, of course, but he calmly stated Sarah had checked out a book and left. No one suspected a thing. Lily saw him the next day, in the library, as calm and unsettling as ever. He even smiled at her, a pale, unnerving curve of his lips.
Years passed. Lily grew up, but the memory of that day in the archives remained a frozen tableau in her mind. She avoided libraries. She cut her long chestnut hair short, and she shuddered at the sight of porcelain dolls. She never forgot Sarah Jenkins, or the quiet, possessive way Mr. Abernathy had tended to her hair. One day, decades later, long after Mr. Abernathy had retired and Northwood Academy itself was slated for demolition, Lily, now an adult, felt an irresistible pull to revisit the old library. She needed to know. She needed proof, closure. She snuck into the abandoned building, flashlight in hand, the air thick with dust and the ghosts of her past. She found the old library, now a desolate wreck, shelves toppled, books rotting. She found the archives, the rolling shelf still blocking the entrance, but now easily moved. With trembling hands, she pushed it aside and stepped into the darkness. Her flashlight beam swept across the forgotten shelves, illuminating thick layers of grime. And there, against the far wall, was a large glass display case she'd never seen before, covered with a grimy cloth. She pulled the cloth away, and the beam of her flashlight fell upon a sight that stole her breath. Inside the case, meticulously arranged on velvet cushions, were rows upon rows of porcelain dolls. Their eyes, painted with unsettling realism, stared out into the gloom. Each doll was dressed in a pristine, miniature version of a Northwood Academy uniform. But it wasn't just the dolls. Each one had real hair, long, flowing, lustrous hair, golden like Sarah's, black like Emily Peterson, who had vanished 2 years after Sarah, red like little Clarabelle, who had run away the year after that. And in the very center, on a raised pedestal, was a doll with a cascade of familiar, rich chestnut hair. It wore a tiny, perfectly tailored version of the Northwood Academy uniform, and its smooth porcelain face held a vacant, innocent expression. Lily stared, a cold dread seeping into her bones. The doll's features weren't a perfect match, but the hair was undeniably hers, the hair she had worn as a 10-year-old, the hair Mr. Abernathy had so often admired with his unsettling gaze. A small handwritten tag was tied to the doll's wrist in elegant, looping script. It read, "Candace, my favorite, so much potential." Lily's flashlight clattered to the floor, plunging the archive into darkness. Outside, the wind howled through the broken windows of Northwood Academy, a sound that seemed to carry the faint ghostly whispers of little girls forever trapped in their perfect porcelain forms. Mr. Abernathy hadn't been collecting dolls, he had been curating them. And in his quiet, meticulous way, he had been waiting for the right moment to complete his collection.
Ilara was, by all accounts, perfect. She had the kind of effortless beauty, raven hair, eyes the color of moss agate, and a quiet, focused grace that made her the subject of endless admiring whispers across the sprawling university campus. She was also intelligent, studying advanced theoretical physics, a world of ordered principles and predictable outcomes. But Ilara's world was being quietly destabilized by the unpredictable chaos of one person, Tobias. Tobias wasn't ugly, but he was unremarkable, a blur in the sea of students. He was in Ilara's mandatory Calculus 3 class, and that was the extent of their true association. To Tobias, however, they were already entangled in a perfect geometric love story. He saw himself as the necessary radius to Ilara's flawless circumference. He never spoke to her. Instead, he simply observed. At first, it was subtle. Ilara would find a single perfect white gardenia left on the desk in her favorite library carrel. She'd dismiss it as a random admirer. Then the gifts became more personal, more specific. A copy of the obscure 19th century German poetry anthology she'd only mentioned once during a study session. A homemade pastry wrapped in parchment paper and tied with a silk ribbon, waiting by her bike lock. One afternoon, she found a hand-drawn map tucked into her backpack. It wasn't a map of the campus. It was a map of her movements that day. A line traced her walk from the dorm to the lecture hall, a dotted line marking her detour to the coffee shop, and a perfect X marking her current location, the very bench she was sitting on. A cold terror finally replaced her annoyance. She knew it had to be Tobias. He always sat 3 rows behind her in Calc 3, his gaze of physical weight on her back, never aggressive, just utterly, chillingly persistent. She went to the campus security, showing them the map and detailing the gifts.
The officer sighed, looking at the profile of Tobias, a quiet, high-achieving math student. "Ms. Thorne, he hasn't threatened you. No explicit harassment. He's just infatuated," the officer said, dismissively. "We'll issue a warning, but that's all we can do." The warning did nothing. It only seemed to escalate the obsession. The next day, Ilara found a package taped to her door. Inside was a large, meticulously carved wooden box. It smelled faintly of cedar and varnish. Inside the box, nestled on purple velvet, was not a gift, but a single, perfectly sculpted object. It was a model, scaled down and impossibly detailed, of her own head. It was beautiful, capturing her exact features, but unsettlingly realistic, down to a tiny, almost invisible mole just below her left ear. Attached to the base was a small engraved brass plaque. Tobias Muse, Perfection, Ilari. Ilara screamed and threw the box across the room. This was not admiration. This was possession. She realized that to create this, he must have been closer than she ever imagined, studying her angles, her profile, her vulnerabilities. She packed a bag immediately. She wasn't going to wait for the campus police to take action. She called a friend 3 hours away, planning to leave that night.
At 10:45 p.m., Ilara was locking her dorm room when she noticed it. Her door was always a pale blue. Now, a freshly painted thin red line traced the entire perimeter of the door frame, perfectly straight, perfectly symmetrical. A deep dread coiled in her stomach. She rushed down the hallway, her small suitcase dragging behind her. The corridor was silent, the only sound the frantic pounding of her own heart. As she reached the exit staircase, a new scent hit her, the cloying, sweet smell of a greenhouse, white gardenias, dozens of them. She turned the corner. The stairwell was completely dark, save for the emergency light at the landing. She flicked her phone flashlight on. The walls were covered in hundreds of dried, pressed white gardenias, taped in a sprawling, interlocking pattern of impossible geometry. They covered every surface, every inch of concrete, radiating from a single point at the center of the wall. It looked less like decoration and more like a terrifying floral algorithm. And standing at the foot of the stairs, blocking her exit, was Tobias. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a small silver compass and a ruler. He was wearing his usual tweed jacket, looking neat and utterly normal. "Ilara," he said, his voice calm, rational, and terrifying. "You shouldn't leave. The solution to our proof of concept is right here." "Let me go, Tobias," Ilara whispered, stepping back. No, darling, I can't," he said, shaking his head. "Don't you see? You are the flawless form. I am the function. I have calculated every variable of your life, every angle, every trajectory. Your attempt to leave? That was simply a necessary deviation to prove the stability of my constant." He took a step towards her. "You think you want chaos, Ilara. You think you want freedom, but you are a beautiful truth, and beautiful truths must be contained." Tobias opened his hand.
He wasn't holding a knife. He was holding a small, delicate silver compass. "I found a new variable," he said, smiling softly, "a new element of beauty." Ilara didn't run. She stood frozen, watching Tobias advance. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if navigating a carefully drawn diagram. "It's a perfect fit," he whispered, reaching out to touch her cheek. His hands were cold and precise. "You are the final, elegant solution to my life's equation." He didn't touch her face, though. He reached behind her neck and gently pulled her hair away. Then he produced a tiny, almost invisible metal instrument. Ilara felt a sudden sharp pinch, like a bee sting, at the base of her skull, right where her neck met her spine. She gasped, a shock running through her body. "Just a small adjustment," Tobias murmured, his face close to hers. "A tiny anchor." He then gently placed the silver chain around her neck, securing a small, heavy silver locket. The locket was shaped like a perfect cube. Ilara felt dizzy, and then, inexplicably, calm. The fear dissolved, replaced by a strange sense of serene resignation. She looked at Tobias and saw not a threat, but a partner, her purpose. "Where are we going, Tobias?" she asked, her voice soft, obedient. "To the lab, my beautiful Constant," he said, taking her hand. "We have so much work to do. We need to preserve your perfection." The next morning, the police finally acted on Ilara's report, breaking down her dorm room door. The room was empty, save for the scattered remnants of the sculpted head and the unsettling blood-red line around the doorframe. Campus security searched the science buildings, focusing on the basement labs for theoretical physics. In a remote, rarely used lab, they found Tobias. He was sitting neatly at a workstation, humming quietly, staring at a bank of monitors filled with complex flowing data, lines, angles, and perfect circles. He was alone.
But on the main workbench, the police found Ilara. She was no longer beautiful in the vibrant living sense. She was beautiful in the terrifying preserved sense. Her body was suspended upright in a custom-built, hermetically sealed glass chamber, filled with a clear, viscous preserving agent. Her eyes were open, staring straight ahead, her face a mask of serene, perfect stillness. Tobias had not killed her. He had merely arrested her state of being. On the glass of the containment unit, written in a clear, precise hand, was a simple label. It was not a name, but a mathematical constant, a statement of immutable truth. Tobias looked up, smiling faintly at the officers. "See," he said, gesturing proudly at the chamber. "She is finally perfect. She is now an elegant, constant form. And look," he added, pointing to a tiny, barely perceptible wire running from the silver cube locket around her neck, snaking down into the base of the preservation unit. "She's still providing the data for the next phase of the experiment. She can't leave. Her radius is complete." The humming in the room wasn't the servers. It was the low, steady whir of the preservation unit, endlessly maintaining Ilara's state of perpetual, perfect, final beauty.